Hey everyone, and welcome back. Today we're going to do a deep dive into a topic that I think we can all relate to on some level: big feelings.
Oh, yeah.
Those really intense emotions that sometimes feel like they're going to take over. And so, to help us navigate this emotional landscape,
Hmm.
we're diving into Liz Fosslien's book, Big Feelings, and we've got some really interesting excerpts from a summary of the book
Yeah.
that we're going to be exploring together.
Stuff, yeah.
And I think this deep dive is going to be super helpful for anyone who wants to better
Oh,
understand,
yeah.
manage their emotions,
For sure.
build resilience, and ultimately communicate more effectively because, let's face it, ignoring those big feelings
Yeah.
doesn't make them go away.
No, they just keep bubbling up.
They really do.
They do. And what's fascinating to me is how often we're kind of told to just suppress them,
Right, yeah.
like keep calm and carry on. But these big feelings actually hold so much valuable information. Like
Yeah.
they're clues to what we need, what our values are, even our unmet desires.
Okay, so before we get into all of that,
Sure.
how does Liz Fosslien actually define big feelings? What are we talking about here?
Well, she talks about them as those intense emotions that we all experience.
Yeah.
The anxiety, the stress,
Right.
the deep sadness, but also the flip side, the intense joy and excitement.
Okay, so the whole spectrum.
The whole spectrum, exactly. And the key takeaway here is that they're a natural part of being human.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not about eliminating them altogether. It's about learning to understand them and work with them.
That makes sense. But, the summary also mentioned that we're often taught to kind of suppress these emotions, especially the negative ones.
Right.
Is that really so bad? I mean, sometimes it feels like a stiff upper lip is what gets you through the day.
Yeah. I mean, it can be helpful in the short term,
Right.
when you need to just kind of power through something.
Yeah.
But chronically suppressing those emotions can actually be really detrimental to our well-being.
Really?
It's like trying to hold a beach ball underwater.
Oh.
You're using all this energy to keep it down, and eventually it's going to pop back up.
It's going to come out somehow.
Exactly. And maybe even more forcefully so. Creating space to acknowledge and process those big feelings is really essential.
So how do we move from suppressing those beach balls to actually navigating those big feelings?
Yeah, well, mindfulness and self-awareness are really important starting point.
Okay.
Think of mindfulness as kind of hitting that pause button amidst the chaos.
Mm-hmm.
It's about bringing your attention to the present moment without judgment.
Right.
And even simple practices like taking a few deep breaths or going for a mindful walk can make a big difference.
Yeah, a mindful walk sounds so relaxing, but I'm curious, does that really help when you're in the midst of a panic attack and your
Right.
heart is racing and you feel like you can't breathe?
Well, mindfulness can definitely help in those moments, but self-awareness is really key here.
Okay.
It's about understanding what triggers those intense emotional responses in the first place. So one practice that can be super helpful is journaling,
Mm-hmm.
like actually writing down your feelings
Yeah.
and the events that led up to them,
Right.
because then you might start to notice patterns. Like, oh, every time I have to give a presentation, I feel this wave of anxiety.
Interesting. So it's like becoming a detective for your own emotional patterns.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then you can start to kind of anticipate and maybe even manage those big feelings a little better.
I like that. And then there's this word that everyone loves to throw around: boundaries.
Yes,
And I know they're important,
absolutely.
but I struggle with what that actually looks like
Yeah.
in practice.
I hear you. It's about really honoring your needs and values.
Mm-hmm.
Think of boundaries as kind of a protective fence around your emotional well-being.
Okay.
And it's about learning to say no gracefully, but firmly to protect your energy.
That makes sense.
So, for example, instead of saying yes to every request when you're already feeling swamped,
Yeah.
you can say something like, I appreciate you thinking of me for this project,
Yeah.
but I'm at capacity right now.
Right.
You're still being polite, but you're setting a clear limit.
Okay, that's a really helpful reframe. It's not about being rude, it's about being honest with yourself
Exactly.
and others about what you can handle.
Right.
But what about those moments when you're already in the thick of it?
Yeah.
The emotions are overwhelming. What you do then?
Well, grounding techniques can be super powerful in those moments.
Grounding techniques.
They help to kind of pull you back to the present
Mm-hmm.
and distract from those really distressing feelings.
So are we talking about meditation retreats here?
No, not at all.
Okay.
They can be much simpler than that.
Good.
One popular technique is the 5-4-3-2-1 method.
Okay, I've heard of that.
Yeah. You engage all of your senses by noticing 5 things you can see,
Mm-hmm.
4 things you can touch, 3 things you can hear, 2 things you can smell, 1 thing you can taste.
That's interesting. It really forces your mind to focus on something other than those swirling thoughts.
Exactly. And it kind of brings you back into your body and
Yeah.
into the present moment.
Okay, so besides grounding techniques, are there other things that we can do
Yeah.
to deal with those overwhelming feelings?
Social connection is huge.
Okay.
Talking to someone you trust, whether it's a friend, family member, or therapist, can provide a lot of relief.
Yeah.
And don't underestimate the power of doing things that bring you joy.
Mm-hmm.
Engaging in hobbies, listening to music, spending time in nature.
Yeah.
Those things can all help to kind of balance out the intensity.
So it's like having a self-care first aid kit.
Exactly.
And you can just kind of pull out the tools that you need
Yes.
when those big feelings start to bubble up.
I love that.
Okay, now the summary also dives into the science behind all of this.
Yes.
I thought this was fascinating. Emotions aren't just these fleeting things in our heads. They actually involve really complex processes
Right.
in the brain and the body.
Totally. And what's interesting is that there's a biological basis for these big feelings.
Okay, tell me more about that.
Yeah. So when you experience an emotion, it actually triggers a cascade of reactions in your brain.
Wow.
It's a multi-step process with different areas of the brain working together to process and regulate those feelings.
Okay.
And it doesn't stop there. Those brain signals then trigger physical responses throughout your body.
So it's like a chain reaction starting in the brain and
Yeah,
then
well, yeah.
rippling through your whole system.
Exactly. And that's why we experience those physical sensations
Yeah.
that accompany different emotions. So,
Mm.
you might feel your heart racing when you're anxious,
Right.
or you might feel a warmth in your chest when you're experiencing love.
That's true.
And it really highlights that interconnectedness of
Yeah.
our mind and body,
Mm-hmm.
reminding us that emotions are more than just thoughts.
This is making me rethink how I view emotions altogether.
Good.
So if these big feelings are so deeply rooted in our brains and bodies,
Mm.
how do we gain more control over them?
Well, there's a psychological model called the cognitive behavioral model,
Okay.
and it sheds some light on this.
Okay.
It suggests that our thoughts and interpretations of a situation greatly influence our emotional and physical responses.
So you're saying that it's not necessarily the situation itself
Right.
that dictates how we feel, but it's more about how we choose to perceive that situation.
Exactly. You got it.
Interesting.
So if we perceive a situation as threatening,
Mm-hmm.
it's more likely to trigger anxiety or fear.
Right.
But if we can reframe that same situation in a more positive light,
Yeah.
we can potentially reduce those negative emotions.
So it's all about the power of perspective.
It really is, yeah.
Wow, that's incredibly empowering.
It is, and it brings us to this topic of building emotional resilience,
Okay.
which is essentially the ability to bounce back from setbacks and turn those difficulties into growth.
Right.
And the good news is it's something that we can develop over time.
Okay, so tell me, what are the building blocks of emotional resilience? What are the tools we can use to become more resilient
For sure.
in the face of these big feelings?
Well, one of the key ingredients is emotional intelligence,
Okay.
which is essentially the ability to recognize, understand, and manage your own
Yeah.
emotions and to empathize with others.
Right.
And it's like a superpower
I like
that
that.
helps you navigate those challenging emotional situations with more grace and skill.
Yeah. So it's not just about understanding your own emotions, but also being able to read and respond to other people's emotions.
Exactly. It's that whole social awareness piece.
Right. Okay, so emotional intelligence is key. But are there any other practical tools that we can use?
Yeah. Well, the summary also highlights the importance of self-compassion,
Okay.
which is basically treating yourself with kindness and understanding during those difficult times.
Oh, I need to work on that.
We all do. It's so easy to be hard on ourselves.
Yeah, especially when we're already feeling overwhelmed.
Yeah. And so one practice that can help cultivate self-compassion is the 3 good things exercise,
Okay.
where you take a few minutes each day to write down 3 positive things that happened, even if they're small.
Interesting.
It helps to kind of shift your focus
Yeah,
to the good stuff
Yeah.
and to counter that negativity bias.
that makes sense. And, speaking of tools, I've also heard of this thing called a resilience toolkit.
Yeah.
What is that?
It's basically a collection of resources and activities that you can turn to when you're feeling stressed or overwhelmed.
Okay.
So it could include things like
Okay.
a list of your favorite inspiring quotes,
Yeah.
a guided meditation, a playlist of upbeat songs.
Right. So it's like personalized self-care.
Yeah, it's your own personal arsenal
Yeah.
for those tough moments.
I like it. Okay, so we've got emotional intelligence, self-compassion, resilience toolkits, but there's got to be more.
Yeah.
What else can we do to build emotional resilience?
Well, understanding and leveraging your personal strengths can make a huge difference.
Okay.
There's actually a really cool assessment called the VIA Character Strengths Survey.
Interesting.
And it helps you identify your top character strengths, like creativity or curiosity or kindness.
That sounds cool.
And then you can use those strengths
Right.
to navigate challenges and to build resilience.
So you're using your natural strengths to
Yeah.
cope with those difficult emotions.
Exactly. And finally, it's all about cultivating a growth mindset,
Okay.
which is the belief that your abilities can be developed with effort.
Right. So it's that whole idea that you're not fixed.
Exactly.
You can always learn and grow.
Yeah. And when you have a growth mindset,
Mm.
you're more likely to see setbacks as opportunities for learning.
Right. As opposed to failures.
Exactly. And that can really fuel your resilience.
Okay, so we've talked a lot about understanding our big feelings, navigating them within ourselves.
Right.
But then there's this whole other piece of the puzzle, which is how do we communicate them effectively to others?
Yeah. That can be even trickier.
Right, because how do you express those big, messy feelings
Mm-hmm.
without making things worse?
Yeah, especially in the middle of a disagreement.
Exactly,
Yeah.
or a conflict.
So the summary emphasizes finding that balance between honesty, empathy, and tact.
Okay.
We want to express ourselves authentically,
Mm.
but in a way that encourages open communication and
Rah.
respects the other person's perspective.
I get that. But it's hard.
Yeah.
Sometimes when your emotions are running high, it's hard to know where to even begin.
Totally. And so one technique that can be super helpful is using I statements.
I've heard of those.
Yeah, it's about owning your emotions without pointing fingers or blaming the other person.
Okay, but could you give me a concrete example of how that works in practice?
Sure. So let's say you're feeling stressed out about a deadline at work.
Okay.
Instead of saying you always dump these projects on me last minute,
Right.
which is going to put the other person on the defensive, you can say something like, I feel overwhelmed when I receive project assignments so close to the deadline.
Okay.
I'm worried that I won't have enough time to do my best work.
So you're focusing on your own feelings
Yeah,
as opposed to blaming the other person.
exactly.
Got it.
And it opens the door for a more productive conversation about finding a solution that works for both of you.
That makes so much sense. So it's about taking responsibility for your own emotional experience
Right.
while still communicating your needs clearly to the
Yeah.
other person.
Yeah. And alongside expressing yourself effectively, the summary also talks about active listening.
Oh, yeah. Active listening. That's a big one.
Yeah.
It's something I'm always working on.
Yeah.
It sounds so simple,
It does.
but it's so easy to slip into just waiting for your turn to speak.
Yeah, especially when you're feeling misunderstood.
Exactly.
Right.
You just want to get your point across.
Totally. And so active listening is really about truly hearing and acknowledging the other person's perspective, even if you don't agree with it.
It's like trying to see the situation through their eyes,
Yes.
even if you're feeling something completely different.
It's creating that space for them to feel heard and understood.
Okay. And the summary also mentions this interesting concept of developing your emotional vocabulary.
Yeah.
What does that even mean?
Think of it as expanding your emotional palette.
Okay.
It's about using specific words
Mm-hmm.
to describe your feelings instead of relying on just general terms like good or bad.
Okay.
So instead of saying, I feel bad,
Right.
you might say, I feel frustrated, or I feel disappointed, or I feel betrayed.
So it's being more precise
Yeah.
with your language
Exact.
so you can better communicate those nuances.
Yes, and it helps you understand yourself better too.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense.
Right.
But what about those really tough conversations?
Yeah.
You know, the ones where you're kind of dreading them
Mm-hmm.
and, there's a potential for things to get heated.
Right.
I'll be honest, I sometimes just avoid them altogether.
Yeah, avoidance is tempting,
It is.
but it's not always helpful in the long run.
Yeah.
So the summary suggests taking some time to gather your thoughts before initiating those conversations.
Okay.
And doing some deep breathing exercises
Mm-hmm.
can be really helpful.
So it's like giving yourself a moment to pause
Yeah.
and collect yourself before you dive into
Yeah.
those potentially choppy waters.
Yes. And it can also be helpful to set clear intentions for the conversation.
Okay.
Like what are you hoping to achieve?
Mm-hmm.
Do you just want to express your feelings? Do you want to seek understanding? Are you looking for a resolution?
Yeah, having that clarity
Right.
can help guide the conversation,
Definitely.
keep it from going off the rails.
Exactly. And I think one of the things that can make those conversations feel so daunting is that sense of vulnerability.
Oh, yeah.
Like
Yeah,
it takes courage to show up
for sure.
with those raw emotions.
Yeah. But the summary reminds us that emotional transparency can actually have a really powerful positive impact
Yeah.
on our relationships.
Exactly, because when we're open and honest about our feelings,
Mhm.
It builds trust.
Right.
It creates a sense of shared vulnerability.
Yeah.
And that can actually bring us closer.
So it's like by being vulnerable ourselves,
Yeah,
we're giving other people permission
exactly.
to do the same.
Totally. And that shared vulnerability can then lead to deeper intimacy
Right.
and understanding.
It's beautiful, but I imagine that it's also really important to remember the role of boundaries.
Yes, boundaries are crucial
Mm-hmm.
in all of this. It's about knowing what you're comfortable sharing,
Right.
what you need from the other person, and what you're absolutely not willing to tolerate.
So honoring your own needs and limits
Yes,
while also respecting the other person's boundaries.
exactly. And I think that leads us really nicely into this next section of the summary,
Okay.
which focuses on integrating emotional health into our daily lives.
Okay, so we've talked about understanding those big feelings, navigating them within ourselves,
Right.
and communicating them effectively to others.
Mm-hmm.
But how do we actually make emotional well-being a consistent part of our lives?
It's about those long-term strategies and habits that nurture our emotional resilience.
Okay.
And the summary really emphasizes that emotional health isn't a one-time fix.
Mm-hmm.
It's an ongoing process.
Right.
It's about making consistent choices that support us over time.
So it's like building emotional fitness
I love that.
through daily practice.
Totally.
But where do we begin with all of this?
Start small.
Okay.
The summary suggests building a daily routine that prioritizes your mental and emotional health.
Okay, so what might that look like?
It could include things like,
Welcome back to the deep dive. I feel like this conversation has really shifted my perspective on how I view those big feelings.
oh, I'm so glad to hear that.
They're not the enemy like I used to think.
Yeah. And in this last part, we're going to move beyond just the coping mechanisms
Yeah.
and dive into something I think is really fascinating. The transformative power of big feelings.
Okay, so not just surviving those emotional waves,
Right.
but actually using them to grow.
Exactly.
Hmm.
I'm ready for this.
Yeah, the summary really emphasizes the shift from just surviving to thriving. And it suggests that those big feelings, while sometimes uncomfortable, can actually hold the key to profound self-awareness.
So instead of pushing them away or numbing them,
Right.
we should actually lean into them.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's like those emotions are trying to tell us something.
Yeah, what are they trying to tell us?
Well, they're messengers carrying valuable information about your needs, your values, even those hidden desires that you might not even be consciously aware of.
Okay, so by paying attention to them, we can actually uncover those deeper layers.
Exactly.
Interesting. So I'm thinking about those times when I've gotten really angry or frustrated. Maybe instead of judging myself for those reactions, I should be asking what's going on beneath the surface here. Yeah.
What's this big feeling trying to tell me?
I love that. And as you become more aware of your own emotional landscape, it often leads to greater empathy for others.
So by understanding our own big feelings, we can better understand and connect with others.
Exactly. When you've truly felt the depths of your own emotions, it deepens your understanding of the human experience as a whole.
It allows you to respond with more compassion.
Right?
That's really powerful. But the summary also mentions big feelings as catalysts for change.
Yes.
How so?
Well, those intense emotions often signal that something in your life needs to shift.
All right.
It could be a relationship, a job, a pattern of behavior even.
So it's like a wake-up call.
Yeah, it's like that flashing red light on your dashboard
Like that.
telling you to pay attention.
Right.
And if you're brave enough to listen and to take action, it can lead to incredible growth and transformation.
So it's not just about coping with these big feelings, but about seeing them as opportunities
Exactly.
to create a more authentic and fulfilling life.
Yes. And it can be scary to face those fears, to make those changes. But that's actually how you build resilience.
So how does facing those fears actually build that resilience?
Think of it this way. Each time you navigate a big feeling, you're essentially building your emotional muscles.
I love that.
It might feel shaky at first, but with each experience, you become a little stronger, a little more equipped to handle whatever comes your way.
So it's not about becoming immune to big feelings,
Right.
but about learning to dance with them.
I love that.
Use their energy to move forward.
Beautifully said. That's exactly the message Liz Fosslien conveys in her book.
It's about becoming more emotionally intelligent,
Yes.
not emotionally numb.
Exactly.
Wow, I feel like I'm walking away from this deep dive with a whole new understanding of big feelings.
Me too. And as the summary so eloquently puts it, embracing those big feelings isn't just about surviving, it's about thriving.
Thriving.
It's about harnessing that intensity
Yeah.
to become the best version of yourself.
Such a powerful message. Thank you so much for sharing your insights and for guiding us through this deep dive.
The pleasure was all mine.
It's been truly enlightening, and to our listener, thank you for joining us on this journey into the world of big feelings. If you're eager to learn more, we highly recommend checking out Liz Fosslien's book, Big Feelings. It's filled with even more wisdom and practical strategies for navigating the complex landscape of human emotions.
And before we sign off, I'd love to leave you with a little something to ponder. What's one small step you can take today to acknowledge and embrace your big feelings? Maybe it's starting a journal, practicing mindfulness for a few minutes, or simply allowing yourself to feel those emotions without judgment. Remember, they hold incredible potential for growth.
Such a great question. We hope you'll take some time to reflect on it. And be sure to join us next time for another deep dive into a topic that will spark your curiosity and expand your understanding of the world around you. Until then, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep embracing those big feelings.